How to make a baked corned beef in the oven and roasted vegetables. Let's get into it. First, we're going to open our corned beef, flat cut, and remove the seasoning packet. Don't throw it away though, because we're going to use it in a minute. Next, you want to get a tall baking dish with tall sides and line it with a large piece of tin foil. You want to make sure it's pretty large because we're going to be wrapping our corned beef tightly when we're ready. Also, you want to get a plate, line it with 2 or 3 layers of paper towels, and have 2 or 3 layers of paper towels sitting on the side. Most importantly, before we get started, flat cut corned beef brisket, well, corned beef in general, shrinks down a lot. So keep that in mind when you buy your corned beef brisket. Also, this recipe has to be cooked an hour per pound. So if you buy a 2-pounder, you gotta cook it for 2 hours. I have just over 6 pounds, so mine's probably gonna be about 6 hours and 20 minutes. Just keep that in mind. But for now, we're gonna remove our corned beef brisket and rinse it on all sides in our sink. You just want to make sure you rinse and rub it on all sides. And before you're finished rinsing, definitely get rid of the packaging and any blood and anything else. Throw this away, we don't need it anymore. And of course, keep your plate with your paper towel liners and your paper towels as close to the sink as possible. When you're finished rinsing off your corned beef brisket, put it onto the plate with the paper towels, top it with more paper towels, and pat it dry. Again, at this stage, you want to make sure your pan with the tin foil is as close to you as possible. Make sure it's dry really well. And when your corned beef brisket is dry, you want to put it fat side up into the pan that is big enough to hold it with the tin foil. At this point, we're going to take a quick break and clean up a little bit. Get rid of your plate with the paper towels. So at this stage, your beef brisket doesn't have to be fat side on top yet, but just keep note on which side is the fatty side, because that will have to be on top when we're done. But for now, you want to take some honey Dijon mustard. It can be any brand, it doesn't have to be this one, and rub a 1/4 cup on the tops, bottoms, and all of the sides of your corned beef brisket. You don't have to do like a thick layer, just a 1/4 cup. Make sure it's rubbed all over, and then make sure the fatty side is on top at the end. Now, if you don't want to use your hands, you can always use a pastry brush, but frankly, you're probably going to be using your hands to turn over the brisket anyway, so it's up to you. Again, just make sure it's in one nice even layer on the tops, bottoms, and sides. And like I said, don't forget which side was the top. Switching mine back to the top fat side. Definitely going to be a lot of hand washing in this process. Next, you want to open your seasoning packet. It only has to go on top, so just make sure it's kind of one nice even layer. Spread it around a little bit if you can. And lastly, wrap your corned beef tightly in your tin foil. You might need more than one piece. Just be aware, but make sure it's tightly wrapped. Now, as I said, you are going to have to cook this 1 hour per pound. So keep in mind when you're supposed to start. You might have to start early depending on how many pounds you're cooking. Again, mine is just over 6 pounds, so I'm probably gonna have to cook mine for about 6 hours and 20-ish minutes. You know, bigger, you'll have to cook it longer. Smaller, you know, if you have 2 pounds, you'll have to cook it for about 2 hours, etc. So cook it at 350 an hour per pound. Now that our brisket's in the oven, it's time to start deep cleaning everything you touched. Your counter, your scissors, maybe your mustard bottle, definitely your sink, and your handles. Want to make sure everything is nice and clean and sanitized again. Now about 2.5 or so hours before your beef brisket is almost done, you want to start prepping your roasted potatoes to roast them, and your carrots. You want fresh carrots and potatoes of choice. Now I'm not going to give you a specific amount for these because it really just depends how many people you're feeding. But you want to get a baking dish and grease it with some oil. And depending on how big or small your potatoes are, you can either cut them into quarters or you can just cut them in half. These are pretty small, so I'm just going to cut them in half. You definitely don't want to cut them too small. You definitely want them a little bit on the bigger side anyways. Some of these were small enough to just cut in half. Some of the halves I had to cut into halves again because they were a little too big. But when you're starting to chop up your vegetables, throw them in your pan. I ended up cutting most of mine into quarters. Oh, and I forgot to mention, obviously wash your potatoes and wash your carrots before you start cutting them. But once you're done with your potatoes, we're gonna peel our carrots. Now that we're done shredding our carrots, we're gonna cut the ends off and then cut them into about 1.5 inch pieces, about this big. Should be fine. Again, you don't want to cut them too small. End piece of the carrot, throw it away. Usually cutting your carrot into thirds is usually the perfect size. Put your carrots in with your potatoes. Now when you got all your carrots and potatoes in there, lightly drizzle it with olive oil. Also, feel free to add like other vegetables as well, like fresh broccoli or Brussels sprouts, peppers and onions, whatever you like. I'm just keeping it super simple this time. You know, just to keep with the traditional corned beef, carrots and potatoes. I didn't do cabbage, but you can also add whatever seasonings and spices you'd like. I'm keeping mine super simple, just salt, pepper, onion powder, garlic powder, but you can also add like paprika, cumin, cayenne, whatever else you would like. Just add to taste. Once you got your oil and seasonings and spices in there, just toss everything to coat. Oops. Carrot overboard. Now the bake time might vary. You might need about 1.5 hours, 2 hours. You definitely want everything cooked, but you also want everything browned and a little bit crispy. So you want to bake it off at 350 degrees. Good thing your corned beef is already in the oven for about 1.5 hours, 2 hours. And don't forget to occasionally get like a serving spoon and stir it around every once in a while till everything's nice and crispy. And of course, fully cooked. When your corned beef is done cooking, take it out of the oven and open the foil. Leave it in the pan and in the foil for 10 minutes without touching it, and get yourself a knife and a cutting board ready. When your vegetables are nice and roasted, take those out of the oven as well. Meanwhile, after 10 minutes, grab yourself a knife and whatever these pointy things are called, I always forget, and carefully remove your corned beef from the pan You definitely want a bowl scraper if you have one. They're great for cutting hot things. You can put it right on there, put your fingies on top, and use the knife to cut. It makes things so much easier. But once you've got it onto your cutting board, you can start cutting against the grain, and you can even use your bowl scraper to transfer the meat onto a platter. Oh, definitely don't forget to cut off some of the fat. Too much of this kind of fat will make you sick, so cut off at least half of it. Definitely don't eat all of it. But when you're cutting your corned beef, transfer it to a platter and let everything sit for a second, and when you're ready, you can serve and enjoy.